I told you that the very spot you are sitting in right now was once the scene of a grisly murder? That someone over 100 years ago died in this very spot? For some of you, that could be true, and you wouldn't even know it. We are going to examine one such possible case in the tale of a girl who was killed in 1875 near Indian Lake, Ohio. A long-forgotten tale of anger, deceit, and murder. Today, we dig into the history of Logan County, Ohio in Finding Allie.
So we're driving out to Bellefontaine, Ohio today. We're going to record some video for Finding Allie. Allie Laughlin was murdered in 1875, and her story is pretty much lost to time. We discovered her grave when we were out here back in July, and on the side of the grave there was an inscription saying that she was murdered, and we decided and we wanted to look in on it, dig deeper, and found out a lot of information. We got a hold of the Logan County Historical Society. Our buddy John out there helped out a lot, and he was able to verify some things, and then there's a lot of things that he said that they weren't quite aware of as far as facts of the case and stories. It was one of the biggest murders and one of the biggest cases in Logan County history. Shook the city to its core, and so we're going to go out, we're going to get all the video. We're going to stop in by the courthouse where James Shell was hung. We're going to try and find the area where he was buried as well. And then we're going to go out to the cemetery where Allie's buried. We'll go to the Laughlin family farm. Then we're going to end up at Lewistown Reservoir. So stick with us. It's going to be a fun time. We've still got a ways to go before we get there. Nice, open, lonely road. And I've got Austin here with me. So we'll probably grab a GeoCache or two.
Our story begins on a farm that was owned by Josiah Laughlin. In 1869, he hired a farmhand by the name of James Shell to work for him in the fields. James was originally from Canada and moved to Madison County, Ohio, and then to Logan County with his wife Melinda and their 2 children. James was, by many accounts, not liked by the people who knew him. The one exception was Josiah, who spoke highly of him and reportedly scoffed at all accounts that James was anything other than a good man. Josiah trusted James so much that on a warm fall day in 1875, he allowed his daughter, Sarah Alice, to accompany James and his family to Lewistown Reservoir for a day of picnicking and picking nuts and wild plums. Sarah Alice Laughlin, or Allie as many people knew her, was known as a caring, loving girl who was loved by everybody. She was just a couple weeks shy of 16 years old on the warm fall day of 1875 when she departed for Indian Lake, back then known as Lewistown Reservoir, with James Shell, Melinda Shell, and their 2 children for a day of picking nuts and wild plums. Little did anybody know it would be her last day. It was on September 22nd, 1875, that Sarah Alice Laughlin accompanied James Shell, his wife Melinda, and their 2 children out to this very area. It's now known as Indian Lake, but back then it was known as the Lewistown Reservoir. They came out here to pick plums and scavenge for nuts. And they spent the morning doing so. They had a picnic sometime around noon. And then James informed Melinda that he and Allie would be taking off on their own to go look for nuts off in the woods in the thicket. Later testimony by Melinda, she reported that James came back after a couple of hours and told her that Allie had gone missing. She would then say in her testimony that James admitted to her that he killed Allie. After he told her that he killed Allie, James then told Melinda that he would kill her if she said anything. He told her to take the wagon and the two children back to the Laughlin farm to inform Josiah that his daughter was missing. While she did this, James went off to the local neighborhood, much like the one that is in this area that we drove through earlier, to gather men to go search for Allie. They would search fruitlessly through the night looking for Allie. They would find her body around noon the next day under a thorn bush. She was beaten very badly. From the reports, it looked like her head had been stomped in by a boot. Her clothes were disheveled, and it looked as though she had been raped. Upon finding the body, James would rush over to the group of men that had found her, only to be accused of murdering her. Cooler heads prevailed, however, as several men stepped in, and they wound up arresting James and taking him to the Bell Center courthouse. They took the body back to the coroner, and the coroner held an inquest. Through the inquest, they got the testimony of James and Melinda Schell. In James's testimony, he said that he and Allie had gone out to find nuts, and that they had become separated when she decided to go back to the wagon without him. He said that when he returned to the wagon, Allie wasn't there, and he had Melinda go back to get Josiah, while he gathered men for a search party. Melinda's testimony was far different, saying that not only had he told her that he murdered the girl, that the night before he had also told her that he planned on raping her, and if she didn't go along with it, he was going to kill her. He also claimed that he wanted to kill Josiah's wife and burn down his farm. None of this can be corroborated, as it was only James and Melinda that were there that day, and the two children were too young to give any good solid testimony. We're here in Bellefontaine, Ohio. Behind me is the courthouse where James Schell was taken after being accused of murdering Allie Laughlin. This is the same courthouse where a mob of men came after he was accused and took him out of the courthouse and hung him at a tree that would have been right over here behind me. No trial, no jury, no judge, just a bunch of executioners. They came out here and they pulled him up, and they hung him by a silverleaf maple tree. A lot of people at the time considered this justice. It was later determined that it may not have been justice, as Melinda Schell looked like she was more guilty than he was. It was on that fateful night, would have been September 23rd or 24th, 1875, when the mob of 300 men stormed the building. They took the sheriff and they tied him up, put him in the corner. Several of the sheriff deputies just stepped aside and allowed the mob through, even though the sheriff was trying to stand his ground. When the mob came in, they found James. It took him a while to locate the cell. And they broke open the cell and they took James out of the cell. And they brought him outside. They put him up on a box. And they took the rope that was around the tree limb, put it around his neck, and they asked him if he had any final words, such as admitting to the crime or a final prayer. Instead, it's reported that he shouted out over the crowd, "I'm an innocent man, my wife did it." At that, they kicked the box out from under him. Reportedly, it took him 30 minutes to hang to death by the noose because it wasn't tied right. That's not a way to go for anybody. After James had been hung, they cut his body down, and they took him to the coroner to be buried. Afterwards, they also said that a lot of the men that were wearing masks had taken their masks off, but nobody afterwards was willing to implicate anybody that had done the hanging. They cut down the tree as well as cutting up the rope, and they divvied it up, and several people reportedly took pieces of the tree and the rope as mementos. Kind of a sick and twisted memento, but a memento nonetheless. They buried him in an unmarked grave in the Potter's Field in the nearby Bellefontaine City Cemetery. We're out here at the Bellefontaine Cemetery. This is where James Shell was brought after he was hanged by the mob. He was buried in the Potter's Field somewhere in this cemetery behind me. And we've driven around looking for it. Can't seem to find it. Maybe we'll find it on another visit. But that's where he was buried, was in the Potter's Field here in the unmarked grave, so that people couldn't steal his body. The reason that he was buried in an unmarked grave is because they were worried about his body being stolen because of the interest in this case and the amount of hate for him. So this is where our story comes to an end. Sarah Alice Laughlin was buried here in Northwood Cemetery, near Bellefontaine, Ohio, just south of Northwood, Ohio. September 22nd, 1875, her life came to an end. We may never know who actually killed Allie. Was it Melinda Shell, since the strands of hair were found in her hand? Was it James Shell, who was murdered by a mob? Or was it somebody else? There's other names, possibilities, but no one knows for sure, and none of it's verifiable, not even back then. The only thing that we do know for sure is that on September 22nd, 1875, the life of a beautiful young woman was cut short way too soon. Her family and friends had to deal with her loss, but that wasn't the only crime committed. The crime of the murder of James Shell by the mob, thinking that they were seeking out justice for a young woman. That kind of thing never works. James at least deserved a fair trial, even if he was guilty. The inscription on the side of her headstone reads, "Was murdered near Lewistown Reservoir. There the wicked cease from troubling, and the weary be at rest." Job 3:17.